Welcome to Let's Talk About Health. It's always a pleasure to be back here. We were here about a month ago and we looked at postpartum hemorrhage and how to manage it, and also looked at preeclampsia and its management, and we did that with the Trowbridge Foundation. So if Karen Billington and Dr. Jampo are watching, thank you so much for the great job you did in helping people to understand the importance of early referral and seeking help to manage these conditions, to obviously help to prevent all the complications that can go with it. Tonight we have an awesome session coming up, and I know a lot of you are keen to know more about sickle cell anemia. I'm your host, I'm Mrs. Winnie Ohenekisi, and you are again welcome to Let's Talk About Health. This is coming to you by way of Omega Live TV, Omega House Multimedia, and I have, as usual, Dr. Cann. Dr. Cann has been here so many times in the past few months, and he's always given us very wonderful sessions, so I'm looking forward to this one. Before we get the ball rolling, we have a clip from Ghana on sickle cell anemia just to set the scene. So I would like you all to listen to this clip and we'll be back after it. Yeah. So Dr. Cann, welcome.
Thank you. It's been a while.
It's been a while,
It's been a while, even though I've been keeping up with some of the programs that you've been doing.
Thank you.
You're doing a wonderful job. I don't know where you get the energy to persist with it.
We've got to do what we have to do, so it's great. Yes. But trying to find out more about this sickle cell anemia, I have known about it for years, but I found my knowledge on it is actually like everyone else. So I think people are keen to know more, but we'll be waiting for the clip of what is happening in Ghana. But let's just get it rolling whilst they get the technical problem sorted out, and we will carry on. What is sickle cell disease?
It's, I mean, just as a way of intro, before we watch this clip, as you said, like many of our people, people hear about it. I'm sure that in most homes in Ghana or in Africa, there are people who have the disease going to hospital back and forth. And yet many of us don't really learn about the disease. It is almost like, you know, when you mention a condition like dementia, for example, you see the elderly growing up back home, you see the difficulties they go through, but we don't really talk about it, we don't really learn about it. Sickle cell is the same. And if I cast my mind back to many years ago, when I used to work at Konfanoche Hospital in Kumasi in the pediatric department, for example, you had countless number of children coming in who have sickle cell. Usually they would come in with low hemoglobin to the point where they need a transfusion. And there were times when you would sit there as a clinician, not helpless per se, but it is almost like test after test, transfusion after transfusion for these poor young children who were suffering from one crisis after the other. Roll back about maybe say more than 20 years. Yes, there's been improvement in the care, there's been development, and certainly I know that there are agencies on the ground in Ghana that are trying to support the knowledge and the management of the condition back home. But
I think our clip is ready now.
That's right. We'll but I felt it was worthwhile for us to talk about it, especially educating our community here. Most of their children have no clue that they're even carrying the trait as well. And then more importantly, being a minister as well, I have seen quite a few unfortunate situations where couples suddenly discover that they both have the trait. And then sometimes they are in a dilemma as to do they go ahead and marry, or do they break up the relationship because they know that it is likely they may have children with sickle cell. So I felt that it is worthwhile for us to talk about this so that we can clear the air about certain few issues as well.
Considering not many people know about it, let's watch the clip and see what has been going on.
Okay then.
And then we set this.
It is estimated in sub-Saharan Africa that 50 to 90% of babies born with sickle cell disease die by 5 years of age. Screening the babies for sickle cell disease is now the most important public health activity we can do. 80% of babies born in the world with sickle cell disease are born in sub-Saharan Africa. Now we have treatments that not only can prolong life, they actually make the disease expression milder, so that these children don't need to die and they also don't need to suffer. This young man, Caleb, who's now 11 years old, was otherwise a typical sickle cell patient, will get from time to time some pain or fever. And then all of a sudden he develops this stroke, not because of anything different about him, except he has sickle cell disease.
My name is John Jido, and with me it's my son, Caleb Jido. Caleb Jido is 11 years of age, a non-sickle cell disease patient with repeated strokes and multiple convulsions. The strokes keep repeating or recurring with interrupted convulsions. So we're always going in and out of hospital. I've lost everything in life. Even the mother, the woman who bore Caleb, had to leave because things were not going the way she had hoped. But I've stood my ground and I've promised to hold his hand even as he goes through this condition which he does not understand. Caleb's needs are numerous. He's not able to do anything. He cannot walk, he cannot feed, he cannot do anything for himself. I am his hand, I am his head, I am his legs, I am his everything. And I promise to do so till life is end and after.
When the sickle cell hemoglobin gives up this oxygen to the tissues, which is also what hemoglobin is supposed to do, it begins to deform. And then they become also very sticky. And the body reacts as if there's a cut through the blood vessel. So many other cells come there to try to, as if to stop bleeding. And with all those cells clogging up the vessel, there's no more blood flow. I met the young woman that I eventually married. We got married in 1970. When our son was born in May 1972, 3 days after he was born, we knew that he had sickle cell disease. And we were just lucky to be at Yale at that time because the only doctor in America who had started testing babies for sickle cell disease at birth was at Yale, a doctor for my son. That was never something I wanted to be. But in 1974, Yale University required for medical students to get your degree, you had to do some research. So I went back to Kumasi to do my research. And it was my mother, who is very religious, who said that this is your mission in life, is to do something for these children. And I think between myself and my wife, Janet, we sort of decided to go two ways. She said, well, you will learn everything you can about this disease. I will just be his mother. I think his childhood was generally okay. He was very interested in tech and he went to college. And then, he found a young woman that he liked. They got together, grew up together, got two children, two beautiful children who were, pride and joy at the moment. He was sick for 2 days. I'd never expected that he was that ill. The day he died, I was with him. I actually spent the night, left him because I had to go to work early. So when I was leaving him that morning, I knew he was in pain, but I really didn't think that there was anything serious. I spoke to him about 1:30 and said, yeah, the pain was there, but he was otherwise doing okay. About 2 hours later, my wife called me and said something is happening to him. And they tried to resuscitate him and they couldn't. And that was really a shock to me that something could have happened so suddenly. But I'm almost sure I know what it is, although they didn't, the autopsy really didn't look for it carefully, but I'm almost sure that it was like a blood clot into his lungs. If we could get all the children with sickle cell disease to go through a similar life, I would consider that we've done, pretty well with them. We would like to screen every baby in the country for sickle cell disease. But you have to have a place for the baby to go for care before you start screening. When we started that project, newborn screening project, the country had only one sickle cell center at Kolebu. We used the newborn screening program to start the second one in Kumasi. Now we have 18 that are active. And so our friends Novartis, they want to help us open a sickle cell center of excellence at each of the regional capitals. So those will become the focal points of sickle cell care. And one of the things that became very clear to us is that managing the data around newborn screening was difficult. So we approached Novartis and said that we would really think that it would be very helpful if we could develop an app for newborn screening management. It's been a boon. The nurses love having a mobile phone that has the app in it. They all do texting to begin with, and so when they're now taking information from the families, they're putting it on the app. The laboratory receive on their phones names, birthdays, locations of the children that have been tested. When they finish their work, they just call up each child and they put the results in. When they sync it, it goes back to the nurses where they are, 180 kilometers away, and they're able to begin the tracking. So it shortens the time that the nurses have to find the baby. There's an old drug called Hydroxyurea. In addition to being a treatment for certain types of leukemia and other blood diseases, it helps to make sickle cell blood healthier. And those who take it daily have fewer complications. They don't get the pain as frequently as the others, or when they get the pain, it's not as severe. We have children on Hydroxyurea who have gone for 5 or 6 years, have never come to the hospital in pain before, and they're forgetting what sickle cell disease is about. That is very needed here in Africa.
What we are trying to do is to make Hydroxyurea accessible to everybody. Once we establish all the centers of excellence in Ghana, and then Novartis is prepared to move into the other African countries, and we shall be an example.
You've met a young woman who's we have just employed, and I don't know how her mother did it, but when I met her, she was about 10 years old, and this child has never felt that there's anything she cannot do, and here she is now. She still has sickle cell disease. She has learned to manage herself, and she can still get very seriously ill, but her life has not become one of a victim of a condition and one of shame.
I've been living with sickle cell disease, and it's been diagnosed since I was a baby. Well, my parents didn't wait till all the complications began before they took me to the hospital. Right from birth, it was known. Living with sickle cell disease is not a death sentence. I know I'm not where I wished I want to be, but I'm hopeful. I know that someday I'm going to achieve my dreams.
What we have learned from newborn screening for the interventions that we do is that these patients then grow up to become useful people. They're not dependent.
Once every region has a center of excellence where you can do screening, and when you do the screening, you know where to go, I think we shall reach where we want to go.
All right, welcome back. I was quite shocked to see some of the things that unfolded, and at this time I think we want to make a disclaimer, and we want to say Omega Live, Omega House doesn't own rights to that clip, but we found it very useful. And thought it's useful to share with our viewers. And
I just wanted to say maybe how do I put it, maybe a thank you to Dr. Cann, who's doing a wonderful job in Ghana in the area of sickle cell. And you can see from the clip how much work he's doing, ably supported by Novartis, pharmaceutical company, as well. So we're grateful that this clip is even available. And you can see the clip captures, basically, I'm sure that story there resonates with many of our viewers who, in one way or another, may have had a cousin, a sister, somebody, or even a friend who is a sufferer of sickle cell. But many of us, like you said, originally, do not even know much about the disease. And certainly, when our children grow up and they're going to marry, it is not something we even think about when we're even choosing future partners, that such a disease that makes an impact on the children that are going to be born. Do we need to know more about it? Yes, I think we do.
Yeah. And on that note, what actually causes that to happen?
It is sickle cell disease. You know, it's a term that is used to describe a group of inherited diseases. Okay, so it's not just one particular disease. And these inherited conditions are conditions that affect the red blood cells. Now, to break it down, I don't know if my producer can give us what a red blood cell looks like. In the body are what we call cells, different types of cells. Red blood cell is one of them. Many people may have heard about white blood cells, which fight against disease. Red blood cell is mainly, that is, do I describe it as a substance? Or,
like a protein, is it?
Yeah, the cell
unit
itself, it contains a protein, okay, called heme. A protein, okay? It's got the heme part and then the globin part. Okay, now, like everything else in the body, everything else is coded by genes. Most people know what we call a gene. That's right. Most people know what we call a gene. So when you look at that picture that is there, you would see something that says normal erythrocyte or red blood cells. And then you would see the ones that look like sickle, what we call the sickle cell. The importance of red blood cell is that it carries oxygen around the body, and it is the hemoglobin part of the red blood cell. So as you see the shell, it's almost shaped like a coin with a dip in there. That shape that you see there, when it moves through a blood vessel, it allows it to change its shape. So it's adaptable, or it can be squeezed even through small blood vessels. Now this is coded for by a gene. Now many people understand that, for example, if a child is born, hair color is decided by gene, eyes decided by gene. Every part of the body, there's a gene that controls it. And as a child or as a human being, you inherit 50% of your gene from your parents, 50% from daddy, 50% from mommy. So your characteristics is a blend of what gene is controlling what. So sometimes you would hear, oh, she looks like mommy or she looks like daddy. It is just genes that is controlling. In the same way, there's a gene that controls the red blood cell as well, the production of the red blood cell. Majority of people have what we call the normal red blood cell. Unfortunately, in sickle cell, for example, the gene that codes for the hemoglobin, it leads to a faulty hemoglobin. So what you have is that the cell, when it's passing through the blood cells, it's not like your typical normal red blood cell that flows effortlessly. With the sickle cell, because of this faulty programming of the hemoglobin, it makes the cell a bit more fragile. So for example, whereas the normal blood cell, red blood cell, can squeeze itself through, say, a tiny blood vessel, under crisis, the sickle cell, it breaks up because it's quite rigid and it doesn't bend easily. And then again, they stick together, making it very difficult. So if you have thousands of cells that are passing through a blood vessel and they can stick together and they become sickled or they break up easily, then it is quite serious really, because it is going to almost like cause debris or blockage in the blood cell. And I'm explaining it this way because you would see that most of the symptoms associated with the disease is linked to this blockage of the blood vessel. So number one, it is an inherited condition, which means that it is passed on from parents to the child. And number two, it describes a group.
From both parents.
For a child to have the disease, sickle cell anemia, the child needs to inherit 140 gene from mommy, 140 gene from daddy to be able to get the disease.
I wanted to say that because our people, every problem that comes to the family is the woman's fault, pretty much. Every problem with the baby.
That's right.
But it is a shared...
It's a shared problem. I'm sure many viewers have heard the term trait, AS, AA. Basically, AA means that the person doesn't have a trait. AS means they carry the sickle cell trait on their red blood cell. So somebody with AS means that they've only inherited 1/2 of the 40 gene and then 1/2 of the normal gene from whichever parent it is. Yeah.
I see. Right. And so you've established the fact that it is from both parents.
That's
now.
right, yeah.
How do we know we have sickle cell anemia?
I mean, for I'm sure for years, people have seen the effects of it in the community, but many people do not understand. Thank God for science and investigations. Now, even in Ghana, people go for screening these days so they can know that they have sickle cell. But interestingly, even though many of our parents that have lived here had an idea when they were back home that they had a trait, okay, that information was not passed down. Now, I work as a pastor and we do premarital counseling. And one of the things that sometimes couples do is that they do blood investigations before they get married. And one of the tests is sickle cell, what we call hemoglobin electrophoresis, the test to check whether you've got sickle cell or not. And many of our people are not even aware. Sometimes they have to go home and ask parents that, oh, do you have a trait? Do you have a trait? So then what am I? Do I carry the trait? Because when they were babies and they had that, the heel prick test that is done, the results has never been discussed with them before. That is, if they even know what the results was. And many of them discover that either through pregnancy, when they get pregnant and they do the antenatal blood test, then they realize that, you're actually a sickle cell carrier. You carry the trait, and then the partner will be brought in to be screened to make sure to see whether the partner carries the trait or not, because that has a significant impact on the baby that is about to be born, just to make sure the baby doesn't have sickle cell anemia. So this is how quite commonly it is picked up. Now that knowledge is improving, people are becoming more aware. So sometimes even in clinic, now and again, I would have maybe an Afro-Caribbean couple or a young lady, a young man saying that, oh, I've met somebody, but she says that she's got sickle cell trait, or he says he's got sickle cell trait. Can I have a blood test done to establish whether I've got the trait, which is good in a way, because then both of them would be aware. If both carry the trait, then they know the significance of it, and then you can refer them to the specialist clinics just in case. For the right advice to be given.
Yeah, because we are focusing on like the UK.
That's right.
And a lot of conditions, we do get referrals to be screened.
Yeah.
Is it the same with sickle cell anemia, or people just have to self-refer?
Screening is not done regularly.
It's not.
So, for example, there are screening programs in the country when it takes a screening for cervical cancer, for example, or screening for, say, breast cancer. Those are established screening programs. Sickle cell screening is not an established program where, for example, you would say that maybe every year people of Afro-Caribbean or Asian or Mediterranean origin, or those that are at high risk, could go for a test. No. In fact, I know many of my GP colleagues do not even understand the disease if they were not trained in Africa. Again, because it's a specialist area, or have not even managed cases of sickle cell, because even in this country, we do have dedicated sickle cell clinics that manage those with sickle cell anemia. Are you with me? So if somebody calls their GP saying that, oh, I've had instances where they told the GP that I want to have a blood test done to establish whether I've got sickle cell trait. And even the blood form that is given, they refer them for full blood count or blood group. And it tells you that the person who is doing the referral does not even understand the disease itself, because the test to screen for sickle cell is different from a test to check somebody's blood group, for example. But to answer your question directly, screening is not done routinely, and people sometimes may have to pay for it privately.
Okay.
To know whether they've got the trait or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I'm sure a lot of people living in the UK especially would want to know whether they can have that kind of service. So what are the signs and symptoms of this condition? Because I remember growing up, a few friends that we used to hear, oh, she's a sickler, or he's a sickler. and all we know is they fall ill all the time. What do we look out for?
It's when you look at the signs or the symptoms of the disease, it mainly comes down to blockage of the blood vessels. Now, you would understand that we said, number one, the hemoglobin itself is unusual because it causes the red blood cells to break up easily and to stick together. We use a term agglutination, meaning that they are sticking together as if there's a bit of glue. So when they become sickled, they can stick together. I think there's a diagram there that I wanted to show of a blood vessel.
Right.
And when you look at the blood vessel, you would see normal blood vessels flowing through the blood vessels. And then with sickle, when the person, for example, has a crisis, then what happens is that you see the blood cells breaking up. And when they break up, the danger is that, you've got different sizes of blood vessels. I mean, for the bigger vessels, it may not be able to block it. But for the smaller vessels, this is where the danger is. And these smaller vessels supply the extremities of the body.
Yeah.
So if you look at that diagram there, you would see that at the top, you've got a normal blood vessel that is cut into half. And you can see all these round red blood cells that look like toffees passing through. Okay. And then you look at the bottom bit, the bottom blood vessel that is cut, and you can see how these sickle cells have stuck together.
Yeah.
And you can see that even at that junction, they are blocking that junction. Now, what happens is that, imagine that you've got your extremities, your hands, your foot, for example. The blood vessels that go to the hands, that go to the foot, that go to the spleen, that go to the heart, that goes to the lungs, the extremes are quite small. So if they are going to be blocked by these clotted sickle cells, then those particular parts of the body are going to be starved of oxygen. Because remember that the job of the red blood cell is to carry oxygen around the body. So if your red blood cells are breaking down, then it means that less oxygen is getting to these tissues that are being starved, number one, of blood supply, and number two, of oxygen. So the main thing that you note there is pain. Pain because of the lack of oxygen and blood getting to those tissues. Quite commonly, I mean, in the UK, for example, it's managed quite well. So patients don't tend to have a lot of crisis. But if you take a place like Africa, I mean, where I used to work, and people can't even afford.
Yeah.
And sometimes even their lack of understanding of the disease itself means that by the time the child is even seen or the person is even seen and diagnosed, sometimes the complications have already set in. Symptoms are, if we take a typical crisis, what characterizes the crisis usually is the pain that they go through. And the pain can be such that sometimes we have to give very strong painkillers. So they may complain of chest pain, they may complain of abdominal pain, they may complain of pain of the joints, for example, because these are all areas supplied by blood vessels. If we start from the head to the toe, patients may complain of sudden loss of vision or blurred vision. Again, you're dealing with tiny little blood supply, blood vessels that are supplying the back of the eye, the retina, for example, that are being blocked by these clumped up sickle cells. And then if you come all the way to the chest, they can have what we call acute chest syndrome. Okay. The acute chest syndrome is because if you take the lungs, the smaller vessels that are supplying part of the lungs can also get blocked. So the patients complain of severe pain in the chest. They can present with abdominal pain. Quite commonly, you would find sickle cell patients develop what they call gallstones. Okay, these are stones in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is a small organ found in the liver, and that can cause acute pain. Or in some cases, now when the blood vessels are being broken down, the body is very clever. There's an organ in the abdomen called the spleen, which is tucked on the left-hand side, just in front of the kidney, the left kidney. The spleen forms part of the body's defense system. Now, whenever there's a huge supply of blood flow that goes through the screen. The reason is that it picks up infection and foreign proteins and breaks them down. When it sees these broken down blood cells, it sees them as protein. So it does something we call sequestration. It mops them up. Now, in so doing, it causes the spleen to enlarge. And so if you go to Africa, for example, in patients that have complications of sickle cell, you tend to have something we call hepatosplenomegaly, which is an enlarged liver and an enlarged spleen, which is a complication of constant crisis that they've been having. In men, one of the symptoms or effects of sickle cell is that in the man, for example, the man could have something we call priapism. Priapism is where they have very painful and prolonged erection. Again, as a result of blockage of the small vessels that are supplying the penis. So we're not talking about an erection as a result of Viagra, for example. This is as a result of a crisis.
Yeah.
And that can stay on sometimes for up to 24 hours.
Yeah.
I have seen one
I've
in
seen one
Confirmative
too.
before Polyclinic before
In
where
Kolebu, yeah.
the guy was brought. I mean, it was a very distressing situation for the patient. That's a complication. We know that some of the long-term effects that you see is delayed puberty, stunted growth. And just as you saw in the clip, somebody could present as part of the crisis, they've had a stroke, simply because the blood vessels that supply the brain are quite tiny. So it is almost like somebody's suffering from a stroke as a result of a blood clot. It is the same as you have.
Yeah.
But typically when they go into crisis, what you tend to see is the anemia, the pain, and quite commonly in Africa, you see them coming in to have their blood transfusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you try to tell us about the different traits of the disease, like AS and SS,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
that we hear about. Is there any particular group of patients that get the worst of it?
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. I've had patients, or I've known people who have sickle cell anemia, sickle cell disease itself, and they've not had a crisis before. And again, as I said, management in this country is quite good. So there are patients who have never had a crisis before, never been admitted for transfusion before. They are taken. The good thing is that once the disease is diagnosed very early, as a newborn, okay, even if it's not detected in this country because of antenatal screening, it will be picked up anyway.
Okay.
Before the baby is born. And once it's known, as soon as the baby is born and the heel prick test is done, because we know mom has a trait, dad has a trait, the test is done quickly, and it is established that, okay, baby has sickle cell anemia, then straight away, specialist care is put in place. So then right from infancy, the baby is getting the right care and the right management of any crisis that comes along, so the outcome is quite good. And then you can have also maybe children that were born back home in Africa or their home country who have migrated here. Again, if they come here at a very young age and the disease is picked up or the diagnosis is made early, then good intervention can be put in place by the specialist clinics, so that it reduces long-term complications for them as well.
Right.
But anybody can have a bad crisis, and anybody can also go through many years without a crisis. Why? I don't know. I guess everybody is different, basically, yeah.
Right, because we've mentioned crisis so much, and I think that is the basis of the disease, if I should say. Is there anything that predisposes one or a sickle cell patient from having crisis?
Again, it goes down to the basics. You're dealing with blood cells and blood flow. Temperature plays a great role. Hydration plays a great role. If you have liquid passing through a vessel and the person is dehydrated, then obviously, I mean, by logic, you would think that it will be less diluted, isn't it? Or more viscous, the term that some people use. And the more viscous the blood is, the more riskier, or the higher the likelihood of the blood cells coming together. So one of the advice that sickle cell patients are always given is that they must learn to keep adequately warm. Extreme changes in temperature, for example, the person went for swimming, which is very cold, and then suddenly enters a very hot room, for example. Extreme changes in temperature can cause sickling, it can cause a crisis. So they are trained how to manage these temperature changes. And then again, pressure changes. Remember that you're dealing with blood cells that are a bit fragile. So if, for example, the person flies on an aircraft which is not pressurized, then that pressure change alone can cause sickling. So extreme cold can trigger off a sickling crisis. Extreme heat that can lead to extreme sweating and dehydration can trigger off crisis. Pressure. If the person goes onto a high mountain, usually you associate high mountains with low oxygen levels, isn't it? Or higher altitudes. If there's low oxygen there already, you've got cells that are sickled, not carrying enough oxygen, and then you are in an area where the oxygen levels are low. It's more than enough to trigger a crisis. Actually, you know, people who have AS or the trait, they are usually quite fine. But if they find themselves in a non-pressurized aircraft, it could trigger symptoms. That's right, simply because they've got the trait there, but under extreme conditions or very low levels of oxygen in high altitudes, they could also develop a crisis as well.
Yeah, with all this, people will be wondering, so what help is there for these people? Can it be treated at all? Sickle cell disease? Yes,
you treat the symptoms. Most of our patients have become expert patients. Their parents are expert. They know when a crisis is coming on. And as soon as a crisis is coming on, they would give us a call at the GP surgery. It depends on the time of the day. It depends on what symptoms they're describing. Usually they know when to pop into A&E anyway, or they know when to call the specialist clinics. They know when to be admitted. A lot of the patients have been well educated. If it's a child, parents have been well educated by the clinic. The situation is different in Africa, of course, because of logistical reason. And then the ability to even access a specialist center. You could see from the clips that we don't have that many specialist centers in Africa that manage sickle cell patients. And then even for our district hospitals as well, there are not many specialists there that can actually manage the disease on its own. In terms of treatment, you treat symptoms. So the majority of our patients are on prophylaxis anyway. You would hear they would take penicillin for life, simply because they are prone to infections. The condition is such that, you remember I mentioned the spleen. The spleen mopping up the blood cells and destroying blood cells. It opens up the patient for all kinds of infection, and there are specific bacterial infection that sickle cell patients with sickle cell anemia are prone to. So for the rest of their life, they have to be on penicillin prophylaxis.
Okay,
that's right. Now, if patients are also prone to having frequent crisis, then in the specialist center, they might put them on a medication called hydroxy. That's right. No, it's not hydroxychloroquine. It's we call it hydroxyurea.
Okay.
That they take on a regular basis. Okay, and that helps to prevent the cells from clotting, and thereby reducing the crisis levels. We always advise patients to also have certain vaccinations as well. So, for example, the pneumococcal vaccination, because chest infections can be quite dangerous in somebody with sickle cell anemia. Certain bacterial infections, they need to have their jabs against meningitis and something we call Haemophilus influenza type B organism as well. And then, of course, the annual flu jab. Again, even though this is a UK program, in Ghana as well, some of these vaccines are available, and patients can have access to them. And it kind of protects them against the diseases that could, because if somebody with sickle cell anemia develops a disease, it could be catastrophic. If they find themselves in a village, nowhere near any health center that could offer them immediate attention, they could easily die. Now, is there a cure? A million-dollar question. It can be. The only way that you can cure is by replacing the bone marrow. There's something called stem cell therapy. Are you with me? Now, when we talk about stem cells, you're talking about, when a baby is developing, something we call embryonic cells, or the basic building blocks for manufacturing, producing red blood cell time after time after time, because the average lifespan of a red blood cell is 120 days in a normal one. If you have sickle cell anemia, it can break down quite quickly. Now, as they are breaking down, they need to be manufactured as well. Now, that manufacturing plant is the bone marrow. So if you're going to cure the disease, then you need to find a way of replacing the stem cells into the bone marrow. That is a therapy. At the moment, it is not something that is ruled out or offered. The specialist centers decide who, because of the risk of the bone marrow transplant that you're going to do, or the stem cell transplant that you're going to do. It is not a simple treatment, but I believe that, there's a lot of technological advancement with gene therapies and all that coming up. So I'm sure in future we may have something, yeah.
Yeah, and what is the life expectancy for people living with sickle cell disease?
It's difficult to place an age. It depends on, number one, when it was picked up, time of diagnosis. If, for example, it wasn't diagnosed until the person is 15, 16, 17 years of age, and they've been ill all that time, then complications have already set in, and that shortens the person's lifespan. But as I told you, there are patients with sickle cell anemia who have not even developed symptoms at all.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as it's being managed properly, then I don't see why they cannot grow all the way into adulthood. As you saw from the clip that we saw, that young lady there. Interestingly, when you look at the statistics, it says that in sub-Saharan Africa, every year there are about 300,000 to 400,000 babies that are born with sickle cell disease. Before the age of 5, 50 to 90% of them die before the age of 5 years. That tells you all you need to know about how significant the mortality is if it's not managed right from an early age properly. So if it's not managed well, then you know that, as you saw in that young boy whose father said that I am his eyes, his ears, the boy couldn't even walk. Complications had already set in. He had even developed a stroke. Then the life expectancy is quite short. So the earlier it is diagnosed, the better the life expectancy. The earlier treatment is put in place, or especially the person is known to a specialist center that manages them, the more likely is that they would grow for many more decades of their life as well.
Yeah, there are some interesting questions coming up online. So I'll pause my own questions and then go straight into them, because I think they are quite interesting. So I have Walter Onunga. Does someone with the trait suffer a crisis? Those with the traits, do they suffer a crisis?
No. Usually, just having the trait, as I said, there are thousands of Afro-Caribbeans walking around, or even Asians, or people from the Mediterranean who are carrying the sickle trait, but they've never developed a crisis. In fact, they never knew that they even had a trait until maybe they had a blood test and it showed up that they carry a trait. So they don't usually develop a crisis unless they find themselves at a high altitude. So if, for example, suddenly the person travels to, say, Peru, goes on a mountain, hikes onto a mountain, like Andes mountain or wherever, without adequate preparation or oxygen, they could develop a crisis even though they've got a trait.
Very interesting. And Walter again is asking, does sickle cell affect men's fertility in terms of sperm, says mortality and count? I think it's sperm count.
No, it's not something that I've read about. As I said, it can cause priapism, which is just a complication because of the blockage of the blood vessels going into the penis. But it's not known to know. I may have to probably dig it up, but in my literature search, it doesn't necessarily cause infertility. But I stand corrected if somebody has come across. Okay,
very interesting. I thought I should chip that in, and I'll come back to more of their questions. But can we prevent this? I think you've touched on that, isn't it, in your intro? Can we prevent this, and how do we do that?
I think that is the interesting question, isn't it? How do you prevent it? It's an inherited condition passed on by mom and dad. It's genetic. So the only way you can prevent it is for two people with the trait not having children together. That's an ethical dilemma.
It is an ethical dilemma.
It's an ethical dilemma. I've been asked that question several times, and I would be honest with you. You sit counseling a couple who are in love. They want to marry, just on the cusp of marriage, and then they have a blood test done and they discover they are both AS. Okay, they've read about it. They've contacted the Sickle Cell Society for more information. They've Googled it. They have more information. And then they are asking, what do we do? Should we carry along and marry? Now, how do you answer that question? It's a dilemma.
It is, yeah.
Because there are two sides to the argument. Here they have the resources to go for a blood test. In other parts of the world, they don't have the resources. Do people still marry? Yes, they do. And then whatever happens in the marriage, you kind of deal with it afterwards.
Yeah.
It's interesting, there's a particular slide that shows how the disease is transmitted. I don't know if my producer can put that slide on. That shows the inheritance pattern.
Yeah.
You would see that for every child that is born, there is a 25% chance of that child developing sickle cell anemia, which means there's a 50% chance. So if you look on the slide, yeah, you would see, if I have a look on mine here, you would see that on that slide, there is a father on the left-hand side who is a carrier, and then there is a mother on the other side who is a carrier. So when you see the picture, black, half of it is black, half of it is red. And then each of them gives 50% of their gene to the child. So the child that is going to be born, if you look at the black figure there, no sickle cell gene, because that child inherited the normal gene from mommy and the normal gene from daddy.
Yeah.
So what it means is that the child that is going to be born has 25% chance of being AA or carrying the normal cells. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Of being AA. So if the child has a 25% chance, why do you then tell the couple not to marry? Because the child could be AA.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the diagram, you would see that in the middle, there's 50% chance of the child just having a trait. And there's only a 25% chance of having sickle cell anemia. So if I have the trait, my wife has a trait, and she's pregnant, there's a 25% chance that the baby can have sickle cell anemia. There's a 50% chance that the child will just have a trait, in which case there's no crisis, there's no problem at all. And there's another 25% chance that the child would not have any trait at all, would carry normal hemoglobin. So on that basis of inheritance, it is almost like, hey, we take a risk.
Yeah.
We take a risk. And in the majority of cases, people have healthy children anyway.
Yeah.
That's right. Except that if both of you know that you've got the trait, then the earlier you get specialist help, the better. In that case, when the woman is pregnant, she needs to let the midwives know that I carry a trait, daddy carries a trait. In some cases, they may want to do what we call pre-genetic screening, or there are diagnostic tests that can be done on the embryo. Diagnostic tests always carry a risk. The first one is what we call chorionic villus sampling. And then there's another one called amniocentesis, where you tap the fluid from around the developing baby and then you do tests on them. Both tests carry a risk. Anyway, a risk of miscarriage, a risk of something happening to the baby. From that point of view, normally it is not done. But when the baby is born, within 5 days of baby being born, we do the Hemoglobin test. And one of the tests that is carried out on that blood sample is sickle cell screening. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take more questions online. Right. Rodelyn Graham is asking that what's the connection between sickle cell disease and thalassemia? Okay. And then she also goes on to ask that can a woman with thalassemia trait give birth to a child with thalassemia? So
with thalassemia trait. Again, remember both of them are inherited conditions passed on by parents. The only way that woman with thalassemia trait, the only way that child is going to have thalassemia disease is if daddy also carries the trait. Otherwise, the only thing, if daddy has normal hemoglobin and mommy has the trait, then the child can only end up having a trait and not the disease, because it's inherited. The difference between the two of them, both of them affect the red blood cell, but in different ways. Thalassemia, the problem is with the faulty gene. Remember I said it's genes that code for it.
Yeah.
Now, in that red blood cell, we have what we call globin chains. Okay, we have 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains. Now, those chains are coded for by genes. In thalassemia, the problem is with the faulty gene, the gene that codes. So it leads to abnormal globin chains.
Yeah.
Whereas in sickle cell, the problem is not the gene itself per se, but the problem is with the hemoglobin that is faulty in the cell. That's the difference. However, in both cases, because it affects the red blood cell, symptoms can be similar. In thalassemia, you don't necessarily have a crisis, but you can have some of the symptoms that mirrors sickle cell. Again, in both cases, blood cells are broken down. In both cases, when blood cells are broken down, you have a lot of iron being deposited in certain organs as well. Also, in both thalassemia and sickle cell, you can have enlarged liver and enlarged spleen, because you're dealing with blood cells that are being broken down, being mopped up by the spleen and by the liver. So there are similarities with both diseases as well.
Right.
And also remember that you can have a couple where one has sickle cell trait, one has thalassemia trait. If the child inherits the thalassemia trait as well as the sickle trait, then they can have what we call, in such case, if it's, we do have patients with what we call sickle cell B disease, which means that they've got the thalassemia trait and the sickle trait. That's right.
Okay.
Or one of the things I didn't mention was variants. It's not just the sickle, the S that we talk about. There are also variants. You can have hemoglobin C. You can have hemoglobin D. You can have what we call hemoglobin lepori, and then there's another one we call the Arabic, the O or Arabic. We have so many different people with different types of traits, hemoglobin traits, and they meet other people who have a trait, and that can cause a disease. However, the severity of the disease, it varies. If somebody has SS, the severity of their disease will be different from, for example, somebody who has SC disease, or somebody who has maybe, say, SD disease, or somebody who has, say, S with a lepori trait disease, for example.
Very interesting. So I have Thelma watching from Texas, and she's saying that her hospital in Texas actually offers the bone marrow transplant. So
that's right. Okay.
They do it there, which is good.
Which is excellent.
It's excellent if you have access to that level of health care, isn't it? But unfortunately, it's not readily available depending on where you are. But she goes on to ask this question that she has observed that most sickle cell kids or people have a large protruding forehead. And I think not just even the forehead, but they do have sometimes they have big tummies, I think from the splenomegaly. And then a tinge of jaundice as well carried. And I think you probably explained why.
And the jaundice, remember that whenever red blood cells are broken down, it releases, when they are broken down into the body, it releases bilirubin. And it's the bilirubin that colors the eyes yellow. And in some cases, especially when you go to Africa, you see a lot of the patients with sickle cell anemia, the characteristic you see, they tend to be a little bit more on the slim side because of frequent hospitalizations. So there's delayed growth, delayed puberty as well. And then the forehead she's talking about, there's something we call sickle cell arthropathy, or sickle cell fascia, or it's the typical appearance of sickle cell. So when you see the person's face, for example, in typical cases in Africa, you may see that bossed forehead. And then even the jawline, when you look at the teeth, it almost looks like square. And these are patients that have not had, for example, proper management over a long period of time and have had crisis after crisis after crisis. You can see that they have the sickle cell appearance as well.
Right.
Yeah.
There are a whole load of contributions from people highlighting some of the signs and symptoms.
Yeah.
So Queen Harriet, she's one of our presenters, and she is adding on that they do get anemic a lot, delayed growth, visual problems,
visual loss,
pain, stroke.
Yep.
And I think you have highlighted all these already. So with what you are saying, would you definitely advise for premarital counseling? Everyone should get it. Is that what we would advocate for?
It's not something I would advocate. I mean, how many people would have access to that? And then again, if they have the counseling, the decision rests on the couple.
Yeah.
That's right. I think, what is the benefit of knowledge if we don't make use of it? If you ask my honest opinion, I would say that because it's a condition that is very common in Africa, then in a person's life, at least, before they even make that step, if, for example, now that knowledge is available, treatment is available, we can manage it properly, people can just, it doesn't cost a dime.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost that much to have the screening test done. So you do the screening, you find out. Or if you're a parent, you know that you carry the trait. It may be worthwhile to have that conversation with your daughter or your son and then make sure that they get tested. And if they know that they carry the trait, there's an important decision to make. If they meet somebody they are interested in, the question would be, are you going to ask that person to have a blood test to see whether they've got a trait before you fall in love with them?
Yeah.
No. Falling in love is meant to be spontaneous. It is meant to be spontaneous.
Yeah.
And when you found what do you call your life partner, people believe that you can ride the storms of life together. The practical reality from what I observed in Africa is that, look, if you could easily have 3 children and all of them could have sickle cell anemia, the frequent hospitalizations, it's not easy, I tell you. And this is what tests the relationship and to quite a significant degree. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Personal advice would be, if you can, have the screening done and then make a decision. If you're both convinced that we can ride the storm, or, hey, there's only 25% chance of our child having sickle cell anemia, so we'll take the risk.
Right.
Then so be it.
A number of people are going on about the traits.
Okay.
So I will just quickly go through, and Big Sis AC Mahamond is watching, my big sister, and she says, I hear AC also means a trait.
That's
is
right.
that right?
That
true, means it's not advisable for someone with AC to marry one with AS.
I would not say that it's not advisable to marry, but listen, we're saying that the condition is significant. How do we prevent it? You only prevent it if an AC is not going to marry somebody with an AS. It's a hard decision. It's a hard decision, but sometimes do you follow your heart or you follow your mind? Those are the questions.
Yeah.
Knowing that knowledge is available now, what would you do? Would you make that decision that, okay, the risks are too high. Okay, maybe I don't want to take those risks. That's a hard decision.
It
Are
is
you
a
with
hard.
me?
But
an
totally
AC,
agree.
if somebody has hemoglobin AC, somebody has hemoglobin AS, somebody has hemoglobin AS, they are going to marry somebody with thalassemia trait, again, they can have a child with the disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So more questions. Can sickle cell disease cause foot ulcers? Like what happens in diabetic foot ulcers?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the complications, long-term complications, is ulcers, leg ulcers, and they don't heal quickly, again, because of poor circulation. Remember, when you're dealing with the extremities, hands and feet, the blood vessels that supply them are tiny blood vessels. So just like in diabetics, one of the things you find with diabetic ulcers is that theirs is more neuropathic, because it is the uncontrolled blood sugar that is damaging the little small nerves that are supplying the foot. So they don't feel pain. So when they have a bruise, a cut, an ulcer or a wound to the foot, it takes a long time for it to heal. In this case, you're dealing with blood vessel. It's almost like a blood clot, a blockage that is causing poor supply to the foot. So if the person develops a wound, it becomes an ulcer, and it takes quite a while to heal.
Yeah, so that's established. And
Yeah.
Alberta Kukwabru is saying, COVID vaccine, any advice for people with sickle cell? Can they go and take it? I suppose is what she's trying to ask. The vaccines.
I've not read anywhere that they cannot have the vaccine. Actually, if you think about it, they are at risk of infections. So it would rather protect them.
It will protect them.
Yeah.
And our producer is saying, is it safe for people with sickle cell trait to donate blood?
Why is it not safe? when you donate blood, what are you donating? It is not an infectious disease. Okay. The question would be, if the person has sickle cell anemia, remember they tend to have chronic anemia.
Yeah.
Okay. They have red blood cells, some of which are breaking apart already. So if they are going to donate blood, then they are rather reducing their volume of blood. So would it be advisable for them to donate blood? That's
Probably
the question.
not.
Probably not. No.
Yeah. So it's all making informed choices, isn't it? And
yes.
yeah, even for the sickle cell, the patient who has never had a crisis,
Yeah.
you never know what they can end up with, isn't it?
Right.
Because they can be prone to infections and other
Yeah.
things along the line. So I have another question which is interesting, because you hear about it being a black person's disease a lot, and the producer again is saying, is sickle cell only on black people, or is it with the black race?
No, it's not a black man's disease. I mean, you can Google sickle cell anemia and you can see that it affects people, even though usually we say that quite commonly Africans, Afro-Caribbeans, and then you see Mediterraneans. They also have sickle cell trait, thalassemia trait as well, just as we do, and then Asians as well. Rarely you may find traits in Is it Northern Europeans, Caucasians? Rare, but that is rare.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, but it is not a black man's disease, no.
Yeah. So having gone through all this, I'm sure people will be keen to know what sources of information they can hold on to, or how do they get help.
I think the starting point would be if they Google Sickle Cell Society. That hub has vast,
all the information.
a lot of information there. Or they can even go onto the nhs.uk website. Again, they just into the type sickle cell into the search engine, and you have a lot of information there. It will signpost you to self-help groups, for example, and a whole lot of information as well. I think my personal advice would be for many people who are not aware, maybe they are not even aware that they carry the trait. And as I said, people discover it when they get pregnant and they've had antenatal screening all of a sudden. But if you want to know, you can always give your GP a call and then tell the GP that it runs through the family, or you've got a sister, a brother, or somebody. Almost everybody has a family member who has a trait or something. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And then find out what your status is. Or if you as a parent, you already know that you carry the trait, but you've never had your children screened before, and those children were born in Ghana, I think it's advisable to get them screened.
Yeah.
Knowing their status is quite important, and because it makes a huge difference that they've met somebody and the person says, oh, I carry AS, oh, I'm also AS. Then there's a conversation to be had that, okay, do we fall headlong and then just move along because of love, or no, do we pause and say that no, it may not be sensible to go ahead just for prevention's sake? Those are hard conversations, but I think that in light of information and knowledge, people can make those informed decisions.
Yeah, they can. And I totally agree with that. And there's a suggestion or a question, any idea of the future into this disease? Because I read on one of the hubs, UK hubs, that there is not much research into the disease because it's a very minority of people who suffer with it?
I think comes down to the economics of cost, isn't it? If you're dealing with a minority, I wouldn't call it a minority. If you have a disease or a condition that affects 300,000 to 400,000 babies born in Africa each year, and it's said that when you look at the mortality, the number of children who die before the age of 5 from sickle cell in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's almost similar to malaria. Okay, the question would be, is that anybody's problem in the Western world? Should we pump our hard-earned cash into researching into a condition that does not affect us genetically because it's rare in Caucasians? So why should we spend money researching it? But we live in a global world now where there are so many intermarriages and people are intermarrying. Maybe the intermarriages would actually dilute the risk because people are marrying cross-continental. So it may get to a point where you don't have so many careers around that are marrying each other. But I think that research can still, and which is why I appreciate the job that that's right, it's being done in Ghana at the moment, and hopefully we can get many more hubs in Ghana and Africa where dedicated people can actually put some money into it. I don't see why African governments can actually not. If it's a condition, that's human resource that is dying off before the age of 5. So if it's something that we could do a bit of research in, or maybe even carry out public education on it so that people are aware that, hey, it's not only malaria that kills, that there's another condition called sickle cell anemia that is also killing of people. Because 90% of 300,000 babies are dying before the age of 5. That's huge.
That is huge.
Yeah.
There is some banter going on among the viewers as to which one gets the condition or suffers with the disease and which one doesn't. So if you can clarify, because they are saying, AS, AC, they don't get the disease. And just to clarify for them.
Okay, let me clarify. The trait is different from the disease. When we say AS mainly means somebody is a carrier. You know, normally we use the symbol AA to refer to somebody who carries normal hemoglobin. So we call it AA. If somebody carries the sickle hemoglobin trait, we call it AS. If they carry hemoglobin C trait, we call it AC. Are you with me? Or if they have sickle cell disease, we say they have what? SS. If they have sickle cell SC disease, we say they have SC disease. Now, it is those with SS who develop a crisis. Those with SC who would develop a crisis. Those with AS would not develop a crisis. Those with AC will not develop a crisis because those are traits.
They are traits. And another interesting one, especially for those living in Ghana, that there's a particular group that hardly suffer with malaria.
Yep.
I've heard that before, so they want to clarify.
That's the trait.
Those with the trait.
Those with the trait. For some reason, I think when we were in med school and we were studying about malaria, and it is almost as if having AS confers some sort of protection against malaria. I've still not understood why, but they don't for some reason. It doesn't mean that people can just travel to Africa if they are AS and then not take malaria prophylaxis. No, that's not the advice we're given. But it tends to confer some sort of protection when they have the trait. However, if you're a sickler, you don't joke with malaria.
So I think it will be safe to say we've almost like captured all the areas
most of it, yes,
of the disease. So is there anything you want to say for us to round the session off?
I think personally, working in general practice, I've come across quite a few African families, where they do understand the disease. They are under specialist care. I think what breaks my heart is that with all the technology we have, all the support we have, some patients still, especially with the teenagers, and I can understand taking medications every day to control pain as prophylaxis. Sometimes it does a person's head in, that every day you're taking medication. So people sometimes give themselves a medication holiday, but that's the risk.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in this climate where we have COVID and flu and so many things passing around. My personal advice would be, if you've got a child with sickle cell or you suffer from sickle cell, attend your clinics, number one, take your medications, and number three, have the vaccines.
Yeah.
Just to protect yourself.
Just to protect yourself.
That's
yeah.
right.
It looks like we have somebody who's phoned in to the studio. So let me just see.
Interesting.
Hello. Who is on the line, please, if I may ask? Just hold on a second. Let's get more volume on. And let me say thank you so much for calling in. And your name again?
Mike.
Michael, where are you calling from?
London.
From London. Oh, I'm so happy you are on, because usually people don't want to phone in. Yeah, just go on with your question. What do you want to ask?
Yeah, I want to Matt. I'm on the line about diabetes. So does it mean the symptoms of the joint, the knees,
I'm not getting.
And then sometimes it's very heavy and the swell. Is there any connection?
Yeah, Michael, I think we were having problems hearing what you were saying. So can you go over your question again, please?
Okay. Hear me now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to ask the question. Is there any connection with diabetes and knee problem? Like a weakness of the knee joint, and things to do with the leg.
With sickle cell disease, you mean?
He said
no,
diabetes.
with diabetes.
Oh, so that's a general question. Okay, yeah, we will try and look into that
So
for you.
did
but
he say that? Is there a connection between what? Knee problem?
If you're a sickle cell carrier, is there a connection if you have sickle cell carrier but you have diabetes?
All right, then. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. So we'll try and answer your question, but we were trying to get it straight, whether you were relating diabetes and joint problems to sickle cell. Was that your question?
Yeah, and it's like people that have it do suffer joint, knee pain, especially knees.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there, what will be the remedy and what should they be doing to ease the pain?
Okay.
In the joint and knee.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So you probably missed the first half of the session, but Dr. Cann will go through that again, just so at least you know what to do.
I'm trying to get the question right.
Yeah. So I think for
you've got a trait.
If you can let them know before they go off, because it's been on the air for a while, I don't know this.
Don't worry about that, Michael.
Okay.
Yeah. But for instance, if somebody has sickle cell disease and then they have diabetes or joint problems, arthritis, and they are having a lot of pain, what remedies are safe to use?
Oh, okay.
Wonderful. You put it right. That's the right part.
Okay, so what remedies?
Are you a doctor?
Sorry, I'm a nurse myself, so I see where you're going.
Oh, okay. I mean, the choice of painkillers, it depends on. It depends on.
You're welcome, Michael.
The choice of painkillers depends on many factors. For example,
is there anything else, or should I?
If the pain.
No, I think it's okay. Just listen in and keep sharing, all right? And well done for calling in.
Are you on the every Friday or what?
Every other Friday, Michael, yeah? So let's carry on, but well done for calling in.
I've been calling in all this time if the topic interests me.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. Okay.
What's your name?
I'm Winnie, and this is Dr. Cann.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, bless you, Michael.
Thank you very much for calling in.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Painkillers, usually we tend not to, mention specific types of painkillers on air. What I tend to tell people is that, people have medical records. So whatever painkiller is suitable for you is what your doctor would prescribe for you. They would have to look at your kidney function, your liver function, what other conditions you have. Not every painkiller is suitable for everybody. That's probably what I would say.
Yeah.
So if they've got a knee problem or they've got knee pain, in sickle cell itself, normally most patients would take paracetamol, ibuprofen, and when the pain is quite bad, some patients have been given morphine. So if the person has sickle cell and they've got joint problems as well, it's likely they might need stronger pain relief.
Yeah. And obviously we need the whole clinical picture,
That's right.
isn't it?
Before,
So very important they seek help from the right sources.
Yeah.
So Dr. Cann, we will go on to rounding off, but I was very thrilled when Michael called in, because we never get our viewers to call in. They are very comfortable.
Maybe he's the first
contributing.
Of many.
So hopefully it will give a lot of people courage to come on live and ask their own questions. So I'll let you sort of round off, and then I'll acknowledge a few more of my viewers. And
I think that, just in summary, that it's quite an important disease to know about, and I would encourage people to read about it, because as the statistics have said, that 1 person out of 4 in virtually every African family probably has a trait or carries a trait. So people need to read about it. And then number 2, most of our children are growing up. So for us as parents, maybe we may need to have those kind of discussions with them. I don't think it's out of place having premarital discussions with your children if they've got sickle cell trait at home. I think it's a sensible conversation to have with them when they are making choices about future life partners as well, simply because of the significance of managing children with sickle cell. The third thing that I would say is that when diagnosed early and managed early, patients with sickle cell live a happy, comfortable life. So sickle cell is not a death sentence on anybody. I think that's one of the things I wanted to get clearly out there, that it can be well managed. And you saw from that patient, from that clip, that yes, if well managed, if people adopt preventable measures, and take all the precautions they need to take, they should be able to avoid crisis and then also enjoy normal life, life as well. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, I think we will round off. But Dr. Cann, as usual, what an awesome session. And one of the viewers is saying students can actually watch this, nursing students and I believe medical students can watch this and easily smash their paper on if it should come in their exams. And so many encouraging messages coming through. So for those of you who have been watching, I can see George Noina Latte, Ruby Mills Odoy, ACSL, so many of you who are watching all the time. Obviously, if I don't mention your name, I still love you just as much and appreciate you so much.
And I think that we have a real patient encounter.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Coming up.
Yes.
We've done the theory.
The theory, yes.
Yeah. So 2 weeks from now, there's a session coming up, a mother and a son who are coming to tell us how they've been living with sickle cell disease. So for a mother and a son, so we have a wide range of age group, and they are coming to tell us how they've lived their lives as sickle cell patients. And I can't wait for that one. That should be a very, very interesting session. So for the many of you watching, we have come to the end of another very interesting session on Let's Talk About Health. We've been doing this for 2 years now. I think the last
Congratulations, winning. You've done well.
2 years and counting, and we will keep going because the sessions are getting more and more interesting. All I will say is for all of you watching, you can imagine how much knowledge you can get out there if you decide to share to all your contacts. So don't just watch and keep the information to yourself. Watch and share with your family and friends, because for all these sessions, you never know, you can save lives. And that is the whole purpose of doing this. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back, the patient account of sickle cell disease, and I can't wait. And all this has come to you by kind courtesy of Omega Live TV, Omega House Multimedia, and then as always, all the wonderful professionals who come here. Dr. Cann, I am ever so grateful. So thank you for watching. Keep sharing. God bless. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Renee.
Okay.
It is estimated in sub-Saharan Africa that 50 to 90% of babies born with sickle cell disease die by 5 years of age. Screening the babies for sickle cell disease is now the most important public health activity we can do. 80% of babies born in the world with sickle cell disease are born in sub-Saharan Africa. Now we have treatments that not only can prolong life, they actually make the disease expression milder, so that these children don't need to die and they also don't need to suffer. This young man, Caleb, who's now 11 years old, was otherwise a typical sickle cell patient, will get from time to time some pain or fever. And then all of a sudden he develops this stroke, not because of anything different about him, except he has sickle cell disease.
My name is John Jido, and with me it's my son, Caleb Jido. Caleb Jido is 11 years of age, a non-sickle cell disease patient with repeated strokes and multiple convulsions. The strokes keep repeating or recurring with interrupted convulsions. So we're always going in and out of hospital. I've lost everything in life. Even the mother, the woman who bore Caleb, had to leave because things were not going the way she had hoped. But I've stood my ground and I've promised to hold his hand even as he goes through this condition which he does not understand. Caleb's needs are numerous. He's not able to do anything. He cannot walk, he cannot feed, he cannot do anything for himself. I am his hand, I am his head, I am his legs, I am his everything. And I promise to do so till life is end and after.
When the sickle cell hemoglobin gives out this oxygen to the tissues, which is also what hemoglobin is supposed to do, it begins to deform. And then they become also very sticky. And the body reacts as if there's a cut through the blood vessel. So many other cells come there to try to, as if to stop bleeding. And with all those cells clogging up the vessel, there's no more blood flow. I met the young woman that I eventually married. We got married in 1970. When our son was born in May 1972, 3 days after he was born, we knew that he had sickle cell disease. And we were just lucky to be at Yale at that time because the only doctor in America who had started testing babies for sickle cell disease at birth was at Yale, a doctor for my son. That was never something I wanted to be. But in 1974, Yale University required for medical students to get your degree, you had to do some research. So I went back to Kumasi to do my research. And it was my mother, who is very religious, who said that this is your mission in life, is to do something for these children. And I think between myself and my wife, Janet, we sort of decided to go two ways. She said, well, you will learn everything you can about this disease. I will just be his mother. I think his childhood was generally okay. He was very interested in tech and he went to college. And then, he found a young woman that he liked. They got together, grew up together, got two children, two beautiful children who were, pride and joy at the moment. He was sick for 2 days. I'd never expected that he was that ill. The day he died, I was with him. I actually spent the night, left him because I had to go to work early. So when I was leaving him that morning, I knew he was in pain, but I really didn't think that there was anything serious. I spoke to him about 1:30 and said, yeah, the pain was there, but he was otherwise doing okay. 2 hours later, my wife called me and said something has happened to him, and they tried to resuscitate him and they couldn't. And that was really a shock to me, that something could have happened so suddenly. But I'm almost sure I know what it is, although they didn't. The autopsy really didn't look for it carefully, but I'm almost sure that it was like a blood clot into his lungs. If we could get all the children with sickle cell disease to go through a similar life, I would consider that we've done, pretty well with them. We would like to screen every baby in the country for sickle cell disease, but you have to have a place for the baby to go for care before you start screening. When we started that project, newborn screening project, the country had only one sickle cell center at Kolebu. We used the newborn screening program to start the second one in Kumasi. Now we have 18 that are active. And so our friends Novartis, they want to help us open a sickle cell center of excellence at each of the regional capitals. So those will become the focal points of sickle cell care. And one of the things that became very clear to us is that managing the data around newborn screening was difficult. So we approached Novartis and said that we would really think that it would be very helpful if we could develop an app for newborn screening management. It's been a boon. The nurses love having a mobile phone that has the app in it. They all do texting to begin with, and so when they're now taking information from the families, they're putting it on the app. The laboratory receive on their phones names, birthdays, locations of the children that have been tested. When they finish their work, they just call up each child and they put the results in. When they sync it, it goes back to the nurses where they are, 180 kilometers away, and they're able to begin the tracking. So it shortens the time that the nurses have to find the baby. There's an old drug called Hydroxyurea. In addition to being a treatment for certain types of leukemia and other blood diseases, it helps to make sickle cell blood healthier. And those who take it daily have fewer complications. They don't get the pain as frequently as the others, or when they get the pain, it's not as severe. We have children on Hydroxyurea who have gone for 5 or 6 years, have never come to the hospital in pain before, and they're forgetting what sickle cell disease is about. That is very needed here in Africa.
What we are trying to do is to make Hydroxyurea accessible to everybody. Once we establish all the centers of excellence in Ghana, and then Novartis is prepared to move into the other African countries, and we shall be an example.
You've met a young woman who we have just employed, and I don't know how her mother did it, but when I met her, she was about 10 years old, and this child has never felt that there's anything she cannot do, and here she is now. She still has sickle cell disease. She has learned to manage herself, and she can still get very seriously ill, but her life has not become one of a victim of a condition and one of shame.
I've been living with sickle cell disease, and it's been diagnosed since I was a baby. Well, my parents didn't wait till all the complications began before they took me to the hospital. Right from birth, it was known. Living with sickle cell disease is not a death sentence. I know I'm not where I wished I want to be, but I'm hopeful. I know that someday I'm going to achieve my dreams.
What we have learned from newborn screening for the interventions that we do is that these patients then grow up to become useful people. They're not dependent.
Once every region has a center of excellence where you can do screening, and when you do the screening, you know where to go. I think we shall reach where we want to go.